I think the challenge is, and I'm going to come at it from my natural tendency. My natural tendency is I obviously ask a lot of questions, right? And there's a thin line between asking questions and interrogating, right? And then there's a thin line between asking questions, interrogating, and then doing the best thing ever, which is trying to understand where somebody's coming from, which is really a different way of having a conversation and asking questions. So me, I had to get out of that questioning, sort of like I'm trying to fact find and figure out. A lot of it was I was trying to fact find and figure out what do I need to help, right? Because you want to go in there and kind of buffer this discomfort, because we all want to do that. And that wasn't really productive, right? That was, if anything, that would probably make him push me away more. And so more of it was trying to ask questions about how things feel, And with men, I'm just going to say this, a lot of times when you ask a feeling word, they're like, I don't know, right? Because we don't teach little boys how to feel.
Welcome, everybody. It's Katie with Thrive Alcohol Recovery, and I'm back again today with another interview from somebody who has a very unique perspective on the Sinclair Method. Today, I have with me Betty, and Betty is a couple of things. First of all, she is the wife to somebody who used the Sinclair Method. His name is John. I actually have his success story on my YouTube, which I will link below if you guys haven't seen his story yet. So you got to see TSM from the spouse's perspective, but you also work in functional medicine. And this is something that you guys offer in your practice, Naltrexone and TSM. So I'm really excited for this conversation because we're going to kind of discuss these two different kind of perspectives you have on this treatment. So just thank you so much, Betty, for taking time to chat with me.
Thank you for having me, Katie. I'm happy to be here.
Yes. Okay. Awesome. And I should mention as well that you run a podcast, which I went on recently to talk about the Sinclair Method. Could you just quickly tell people what your podcast is and what it focuses on, the topic?
Sure. My podcast is called Menopause Mastery, and it is geared for the woman that's in, let's say, your 40s and above, that is really navigating this change of life, not just about the hormones. Obviously, we talk about that from a clinical standpoint, but it's also about how to make this next season, next act, like the best ever, right? That's the way I look at it. And so, yeah. And so we do have some men that listen. They're allowed to listen.
That's good. Well, and a lot of women of that age come to the Sinclair Method. And so we may have a lot of people in that age group listening. So just a plug for your podcast to definitely check it out because you've got some great content over there. So again, okay, I know we want to talk about this from two different perspectives, as the spouse, but also as the, clinician, in a sense, it's working with people. So let's start with kind of your professional work and what you do, and maybe just like a summary, I guess, of your perspective of the Sinclair Method and its impact on alcohol reduction and alcohol treatment in general.
Sure. So I've been in the medical arena for over 20 years. And my background is actually, I've got multiple masters and a PhD in clinical nutrition, human nutrition science, integrative and functional nutrition. And 2 decades ago, I thought that I came up with the absolute best plan of what medicine should look like, which was combining physicians with nutritionists, health coaches, counselors, body workers, and all these other things, and put them in one room or put them in one building and then build a practice around it. So, I bootstrapped that for 20 years. And so now we have a very large clinic in North Texas, and we take care of people in the North Texas area, but we also do some telemedicine and other things as well. And, I really got interested in the Sinclair Method. Some of it was what my husband was going through, but to be honest, clinically, and even myself, drinking is sport, this age group. And it was sport when you're in your 20s, it's a different kind of sport, but it is integrated so much of our lives that it sneaks in. And I think most people don't wake up and say, gosh, I want to have a drinking problem today. You know what I mean? Like, it slowly works its way into our lives, and it becomes the fabric of how we spend nights and all this other, and then it becomes, in a lot of cases, a problem that we either ignore or we recognize, but then we're frightened to deal with. And so we see it all the time in clinical practice, right? And so for me, I was looking for something that worked, right? I work in the functional medicine side of medicine. So that means finding the root cause, helping people understand the biochemical activities, the lifestyle, the diet, the psychosocial, all those pieces and how they're contributing, and trying to kind of peel back that layer of the onion and help somebody get those things corrected so they can help their body get healthy. And you can't get super healthy, live a long health span, and be the most vital person you want to be by drinking too much on a regular basis, right? And so I was looking for a solution also that really worked, because as you very well know, the classic treatment we do here in the United States has a failure rate that's so bad, that's just so very bad, that it's amazing that we still fund it in any way, honestly.
I know. And it's yeah, it's just crazy that it's still promoted as the mainstream treatment. I've gone to several addiction conferences, and while a lot of them are aware of naltrexone, they're not excited about it. They don't really care to offer it, or maybe they'll offer it, when someone's leaving rehab and say, just take this and don't drink. And though there's different ways to take naltrexone, they're definitely not open to the Sinclair method. So I think it's really great for people like you who are in this field and working with patients, because we need more physicians and practitioners who are educated about it, and able to offer it to their patients, because there's just a lot of incorrect information and lack of information. And still, I get emails regularly. I asked my doctor for it and he refused to prescribe it. And I'm just like, when is this going to change? But yeah, okay. So how did you get introduced to naltrexone and TSM? Like, how did you learn about it?
So I always knew it, and I would say this is probably part of the challenge that most of your listeners probably hear, is they mention naltrexone. And from a clinical standpoint, naltrexone is given in your 50, 100, 150, like very high doses, right? And it's given as a preventative. And so they classify it as this in the same class as like an opiate drug, even though it's really blocking that receptor. And so it has this perceived, like, it's in this class of drugs that you don't want to use. And so a lot of practitioners that don't even carry a DEA to actually prescribe that. So just in case you ask your doctors, some of your primary care physicians cannot write for that class of drug. They didn't choose to write for those, right? Like pain medications, and because they're all classified together. So looking at it, I was like, oh my gosh, we need something else. And I happened to come across the documentary, One Little Pill, and I'd never heard of the Sinclair method before. I understood the mechanism of action, and if we can get into that if you want, but I saw that documentary and my jaw was on the floor, because I was like, why is this not mainstream? So I think like yourself, it's like, oh my God, why don't we know about this?
Exactly. Yeah. And the thing I get from people is, if this was as effective as you say it is, then every physician would be using it. But to your point, there's prescribing issues. I was just meeting with another physician who actually told me that there used to be a black box warning with naltrexone, which means like it's danger, it's bad for your liver, but the FDA removed that 8 to 10 years ago or something. And this is just something I just learned, but that doesn't, the FDA doesn't ever like remove a black box warning. So there is this like misunderstanding. Naltrexone is an opiate blocker. Oh, it must be addictive. It must be really bad for you. It must cause you to binge drink and you can kill yourself. Like there's just this incorrect understanding of what the medication is and the mechanism of action. So did you want to talk about the mechanism of action, or just like if you were talking to a patient, like how would you describe how this medication works to fix, the drinking problem that most of us have, or for those of us that are impacted by it?
No, you're absolutely right. It doesn't make sense how it's classified at all. So when you drink, right? When you drink, or actually do any drug, but particularly we're talking about drinking here. When you drink, it has an effect on your receptors in your brain. And they're the receptors that turn on the stuff that we enjoy. So that's things like your dopamine. So dopamine is your reward mechanism. It's your anticipation, right? It turns on and kind of pushes on the GABA receptor, which is in the short term is a little bit of anti-anxiety, right? It's the social lubricant. A lot of people start drinking because they're like, okay, I'm going to be in a social situation. So GABA is a little bit calming and slightly depressing, right? And it hits serotonin, it hits your opiate receptors, right? And your opiate receptors are your natural painkillers, and it even hits your endorphin pathway. So all of those, so you can imagine all of those things feel good to you, right? It doesn't matter what you're doing. All of those things feel good to you. So when you have alcohol, all of those things light up like Christmas lights. So you just hit day before Christmas, every light on is on in the neighborhood. So if you've been drinking for a long time, you have been adding lights to your house like Christmas Vacation, day in, day out, day in, day out. Now it's so lit up, right, for that drug that your body's now craving it. Every cell, Alcohol is the only drug that actually puts a receptor on every single cell. And so when you go to give naltrexone, right? Naltrexone is going to start like wrapping a little wrapper over the opiate receptor. So it's like, okay, I'm going to cover up that light bulb. I'm going to cover up that light bulb. And then, to start to extinguish those light bulbs. What makes the Sinclair method so much more effective is traditional medicine says, if you're going to give naltrexone, guess what? We're just going to take it every day in, day out. Don't drink. White knuckle it. Go to a meeting. Go do whatever you got to do. Don't drink. The challenge is that doesn't turn off all the wiring. Nobody came and cleaned up the wiring and pulled away all the wiring for the Christmas lights. They're all still there.
Yeah.
So you've got some paper over the lights, but they're all still there. When you take naltrexone and you actually engage in the action of drinking, what you're doing is saying, hey, brain, I've got my light, I've got my wiring, I've got it there, but it's not working. And your brain goes, oh, because it's March. I can take down that string of lights. And it slowly starts paring back all of the different strings of lights that you put up over the years and starts putting them back in the box and taking them away. And so Sinclair allows you to do both that part, the paring down of the lights and the blunting of the brightness, right? Whereas if you just take naltrexone, it just blunts the brightness, but you've got all the wiring there. And so you don't feel good, right?
Yeah.
And I think, the other thing that was always really frustrating to me is we get those same brain chemicals off of all kinds of things, doing something you love, exercise, sex, having a great, really, all of those things hit those same receptors. So when you blunt them 100% of the time, people aren't going to feel great anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love the way you describe that. It's just such a simple analogy of what's going on. And I think one of the biggest gifts, there's so many gifts for me personally with the Sinclair method, was just this basic understanding of how my brain learned to like alcohol so much that I felt compelled to drink it every day, to binge drink it every day. And then how the Sinclair method, just like you described, helps to kind of like undo that. And I really felt like each time I was drinking on the medication, I was gradually undoing this wiring that had become so hardwired during my 10 years of heavy drinking. And it was such a cool feeling to see myself over time just get my control back over alcohol, because like you talk about, you're not getting those insane Christmas lights. Like, and I guess one question that's coming up for me that people always ask, and I know the answer to, but I want to hear you speak to it, where someone says, okay, well, if you're blunting the reward, then that means you're just going to binge drink and like drink even more alcohol. And so it's really dangerous to drink on naltrexone. What would you say to that question/comment?
I would say it's the exact opposite. I would say what you're really seeing is you're engaging in the behavior you don't want to do that's damaging. So you're paring back the lights. But because you're not doing it every single day, right? You're not doing it every single day. You don't have this urge to binge, right? I see clinically a lot more people that if they go through traditional treatment and they've been given every day to do day in, day out, regardless of what's happening, and engage in not drinking, they'll last for a little while and then they're more likely to binge and drop the drug. So I think when you really look at that paring back that's really happening, the desire itself leaves. It's not that, oh, they're going to binge and they're not going to feel it, so they're going to drink more than they can. Literally, you're like, I'm not getting much out of it, right? It's not the same, but it's not a negative experience, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, because like I could still get drunk on naltrexone, but it wasn't very pleasant. Like, especially the longer I was on the medication, like why would I want to do that? It's not as fun. And that's why I would start drinking just one or two drinks, because it was like I could enjoy the taste or a glass of wine with dinner, and I didn't feel the need to get drunk because that feeling of the buzz just wasn't the same because of how naltrexone was working. So yeah, really well said. Okay, so you learned about this method through one little pill. Were you searching for your practice, or were you searching for your husband, John? How did you kind of come across it?
I'm a documentary watcher.
Yeah.
I'm always, I'm a researcher by nature. That's what I do. And so when there's a documentary, I'm either there probably critiquing it or, listening to the quality of the information. And so I just happened to come across it, and I was, on Netflix or, whatever. And I was like, okay, I'm going to watch this. And like I said, I was shocked that it was just not well known, and it made perfect sense to me, from a biochemistry standpoint. And, again, I kind of looked at it and I was like, this has got to be, the biggest problem. And I said, well, obviously it's because there's too much money involved in traditional treatment.
Yeah.
There's too much water under the bridge, and so I brought the information back to, we have psychiatry, we have internal medicine in our office. And I brought the information back and I was like, look, we need to explore this for treatment because we know the other treatments don't work. They just don't. I mean,
Yeah.
huge failure rate. And so we started looking at it and using it.
How did your doctors, your psychiatrists, and others in your office receive the information? Were they open to it, or what was that conversation like?
Yeah, so we're kind of a unique medical environment because all of our providers that are physicians or nutritionists or health coaches, they're all trained in functional medicine. So they are already kind of way ahead of the industry. We're people that read the studies and go, okay, now we've got 10 studies that have shown this, so we're going to start using it clinically, even though Western medicine is good, 15, 18 years before anything that's been found in this disease actually gets used.
Okay.
So we're kind of forward thinking in that way. And the individuals that are often in functional medicine are pretty open, right? So given new data, they're going to integrate it pretty quickly into what they do. Right.
Okay.
And that's not generally what you run into in conventional medicine. There's just too much like, here's your structure, here's your flow chart, here's what you're supposed to do. And you follow the same flow all the time. We individualize everything to the person. So it was received very well by our physicians.
Yeah, that's really, really good to hear. I know, I think I told you when we did our podcast last time, I was like, if I ever get sick, I'm going to a functional medicine practice because I just feel like you guys really work to get to the, like you said, the root issue. It's not just, oh, here's a pill, I mean, of course, with naltrexone, that's one thing, but with naltrexone, it really is getting to the root of the addiction inside the brain. So that's really cool. So, okay, now kind of transitioning to you being the wife of someone who did the Sinclair method. I often get comments and emails from people who are in your situation, and they're all across the spectrum. Maybe they're the ones that found TSM and they want to know how to support their spouse. Maybe their spouse wants to do TSM and they don't feel very supportive because oftentimes there's this long history with drinking and damage has been done and they just want the person to stop drinking yesterday. So, there's a lot of different ways that loved ones receive or perceive naltrexone. So, just to kind of start, I guess, at the beginning with John, did you notice his drinking increasing? Was it impacting you and your relationship? Would you mind talking a little bit about that from your perspective?
Yeah. So I would say first thing, and this is true for me, it was something that we did in the evening. We'd have a glass of wine. Well, he would usually drink something else, but I would join him. So here's the first thing is, yes, I'm a clinician, but I would have a glass of wine with him, right? I would come home and have a drink, Um, and I did, of course, notice that the drinking increased, right? That it was this slow sort of progression as the job got more stressful, as our life became more chaotic, just because as you get older, usually the responsibilities get worse rather than better. But I would say the other thing that was so noticeable too, as you sit back and reflect, it was also the way that we spent time with friends. So even if you're like, okay, we're going to relax this weekend or whatever, you go out to eat, you go out to brunch, you're out at concert, there's always alcohol present. And so it was this sort of slow progression. Now, I might have been in a pretty lucky situation that, you know, John may have been drinking, but we didn't fight. He was a functional drinker, right? Functional alcoholic. And so I didn't have all of these events that often happen to other people where your life has been sort of pulled apart by the addiction. But I could see it was damaging him and it was damaging our relationship because as he drank more, the more he withdrew into himself and away, right? And so I think, whether somebody's on that continuum where there's a lot of damage to the relationship, or maybe they're just like, I feel like I'm losing my spouse, that is all part of that continuum. I think it eventually becomes damaging, and so everybody can be on that continuum. And so for me, I was supportive because I wanted to see him change, but I also knew that me complaining, whining, cajoling, forcing, fighting wasn't going to change it directly, right? Because I think, especially as women, we kind of want to go in there and fix somebody.
Yeah.
And I was like, I know enough about, human nature. And I'm like, okay, I can't do that. I can be supportive, but I can't make him change.
So that brings up a common question I have, how did he get going on the method? And granted, everyone's going to be different, but you're the one that found it, right? And so how did he decide for himself that he wanted to go on the treatment? How did that go
Yeah,
about?
I probably don't remember all the specifics, but I saw the documentary. I watched it when he was at work one night, and then I had him watch it with me, another night, and I was like, "Hey, I want you to see this. I think it's pretty cool." And it was kind of like these very soft nudges, like here it is, and then we talked about whether he wanted to do it. But at the end of the day, it was really him making a choice at one point and saying, I'm going to try this. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to make the effort to do it on a regular basis. And anybody that watched John's story, he was a longer Sinclair Method user. He took a long time to do it. And I think a lot of it was for him, he didn't really, in the beginning, he wanted to have control of it, but he didn't want to stop. And he kind of didn't want to have that much control. It was kind of like, well, I want to be able to just do what I want to do, but maybe not quite as much. And so, I think with naltrexone or anything, the person who's on it needs to be connected to, I want to get control and stop this. Because you can, like you said, you can find a way to continue to drink with it.
Yeah, it's so true. And like I always think about the Sinclair method like a weight loss journey. Like if your wife comes to you and is like, you need to lose 20 pounds, like if someone's not intrinsically motivated to do that, good luck getting them to lose it. Or if they do lose it, to sustain it. And that's true with TSM or really anything, like you were saying with human nature. It's just they've got to want it for themselves, regardless if their spouse is on board or not. And for those who, I get messages all the time too. Like my spouse doesn't want me to do it, but I'm going to do it because I know this treatment's going to work for me. And that makes it harder when the spouse isn't on board, but that conviction and commitment to see it through, because I know with John in our interview, I remember clearly him saying patience is key because he was more of a long-term responder to the method. And so yeah, people have to have that internal motivation to stay committed long enough to see it all the way through and see the progress.
Well, I think so. I had a little bit of this too, and this may ring true for some of your listeners. Is I had an off switch. I have an off switch. I can sit down and have a glass of wine and walk away. I can put a glass of wine on my desk or my table and forget it's there, and get to the end of the evening and be like, oh yeah, I was going to have some. I just didn't, and I pour it. And my husband's like, what are you doing? Like, you know what I mean? So anybody that's been in that world, and so as somebody's going through TSM, and maybe you're the spouse or the partner or whatever, there's a lot of stuff that's going to come up within the context of that person doing that and you along with it. Do I still consume alcohol? Yes or no? What does that mean for me if I'm drinking alcohol? Is that appropriate for me or not? Should I follow along even though I don't have an alcohol use problem that is affecting my life in a really detrimental way? And I think anybody that goes through that and says that that doesn't come up is probably not being realistic with themselves and others, because there is sort of this internal dialogue as the spouse of somebody going through, the whether they're doing Sinclair method or not, is what does that mean? And what does that mean for your lives? And I think that's a really good conversation to have with your partner, because I'm putting words in people's mouths here, but I think a lot of times when somebody has alcohol use disorder, they feel like they're the ones with the problem, they're broken, they're all this other stuff, and that the other person on the other side that might be asking for change or wanting change, there's nothing wrong with them, right? They're perfectly fine, and I'm the broken one. I'm like, oh no, nothing farther from the truth, right? Nothing
Yeah.
farther from the truth. So I think it's also being honest about those emotional things that come up for both partners. For
Yeah.
both partners, don't ignore that, because all you're going to do is put a bigger rift and make it harder on the person using TSM to stop drinking.
Yeah, that's really well said. I couldn't agree more. And I guess I'm curious, like, because one thing that I think some spouses or partners or loved ones struggle with is maybe they don't understand the neurobiology of addiction and why can't they just stop? Like, this is so frustrating, particularly for those people, like you said, who have had some issues that are linked to the drinking that have caused a lot of pain and all of that. So, would you mind kind of like taking a little bit of a rabbit trail for you to describe, like, why is it that someone who has an alcohol dependence, why it's not so easy as just abstain and don't drink? Like, it sounds easy, it's logical, it sounds like the right thing to do, but it's so difficult for those of us that struggle. And I wonder if you wanted to speak a little bit to that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of like, don't steal the French fry off your kid's plate. All right. How many of you actually don't do that? Right. Never, ever, 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 ever touch the French fry on your kid's plate. If you have kids, I don't have kids. Right. So each one of us, we're all genetically wired, right? So our DNA is, think of it as a foundation of a house. So if you've ever built a house, it's a concrete foundation. You can tell how deep it is, how wide. You'll be able to tell where the plumbing comes up, right? Because most of the time the plumbing's in there. But you can't tell what's on top of the house, right? You can't tell if it's a single-story ranch. Is it colonial home? Is it a 3-story condo complex with a pool on top, right? That's what you build on top of it. That's called your epigenetics. So our DNA, some of us are wired to have stronger addiction pathways than other people, right? That's why we see addiction in families. However, that DNA only accounts for a little bit, right? So just because you had alcoholism in your family or you had drug addiction in the family doesn't mean you will. It might mean that there's a slight increased possibility because your foundation was wired for it. So in my home analogy, you were wired to have a ranch style home, and you chose to have a 3-story condo complex and party on the patio every night and the roof. So what's really important is the epigenetics, right? So that's what we come in contact with, what we think, who we're around, our early childhood experiences, whether we were safe in our environment. And safe means a lot of things. I can thank COVID for helping people understand a little bit more about trauma, but there's big T trauma, like the big things that you think about, rape, incest, physical violence, all those things. And then there's little traumas, and little traumas can be, your parents being somewhat dismissive of you after work because they're busy and they forget that you're important as a little kid. Those things add up. When you have somebody that has a little bit of wiring for that, and they have an environment that may also have made their life less safe, may also have helped or impaired attachment, like how comfortable and how safe they felt in their home. I think, in looking at a lot of the research, that leads to more social anxiety and all this other stuff. So then imagine I don't know, like I was the first time I drank alcohol, really. So the first time I tried a beer, I was 8. The first time I drank alcohol was 13, and I started drinking alcohol at 15. Right. So I was I was not, I was definitely a kid that probably, when my husband he didn't touch alcohol until he's well after 21. Right. But when you add those early experiences, you're also turning on that Christmas light activity, right? So you add to that social situations, the natural curiosity that happens when we're young, and then you add possible social anxiety, all that other stuff, and maybe an environment that makes us feel unsafe and other stuff. And, there's hundreds of other things that stack on that. We set up the right environment for somebody to take something like alcohol that is seen as relatively benign, right? And not realize that the more they drink, the more they turn on all of these receptors, and the Christmas lights are getting built every single day. And some of us have a team of 40, workers building Christmas lights, and one has one guy who's maybe got one leg and one arm. And so he takes a long time to do it. Right. So I think there's that part. So it's like the wiring and what happens in your life. The other side of it is even how you eat, right? So if you eat more processed foods, more sugars, more other things, those same receptors are more turned on, right? For somebody who might drink alcohol, because they use the same receptors. People probably don't think about that, but literally, like, if you've ever been to an AA meeting, what do they have there? Donuts, sodas,
Coffee.
coffee, because you're literally like, oh my gosh, I have to have something. You're like, your body's like, I need sugar, I need something to hit those receptors, right? And so even how we eat can do that. So essentially what's happened is we've created environments where those Christmas lights just get wired and wired and wired and wired, and then therefore we have that. Now somebody else may have not had the same foundation, may have had a slightly safer environment, and maybe they didn't have that experience, right, that reinforced it. But there's a lot of people that drank that never had it in their family. Nobody
Yeah.
really drank too much, but everybody, I think Annie Grace said this. I can't remember exactly how she said it. But everybody is on this kind of sliding slope. Like if you drink alcohol, everybody's on a sliding slope of addiction. There is no question about that.
Yeah.
Just like nicotine and cigarettes, we're all on this sliding slope. How fast you slide down that slope is probably dependent on a bunch of other things.
Yeah.
And I think that's the hard part, is because people are like, well, I can do it, why can't they? And it's like, well, there's so many things that are adding up to that,
Yeah.
and they may just be farther down the slope.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I just know that like I would have like sincere motivation and desire to quit. Like I did it so many times. And then a few days, a few weeks or months later, I'd be back at it again because all I could think about was drinking. And like my brain, I guess, was like craving that pleasure and reward from the alcohol, right? Like it needed that fix. So you hear a lot of people like, yeah, when they quit drinking, their sugar cravings go through the roof. I used to think I didn't like sugar because I was drinking my sugar every day. But as soon as my drinking reduced, even through TSM, I was like, ice cream, candy, I need all this sugar. Thankfully that's behind me now, but it's just really interesting that it's not as simple as just don't do it, because what a lot of people don't talk about is what's happening in the brain when somebody abstains and stops. Yes, they're not drinking, but they're not free from the alcohol. The compulsion, the craving is still there.
Yeah.
And for many of us, that's what leads us to return to drinking again and again and again, because the urge for it becomes overwhelming. It's like we need it.
Yeah. So kind of like thinking about those Christmas light wires, right? So if you have lit it up and it's, Christmas Vacation. So I'm aging myself here.
Love
Christmas
that movie. I watch it every year.
Yeah. So it's Christmas Vacation and you got that lit up, and then you're like, okay, I'm going to withhold from it. So imagine now it's not getting lit up, but somebody's coming along and breaking all the lights. So within a week, half of the lights are broken. Within 2 weeks, 3/4 of the lights are broken. Within a month, they're all broken, but there's still electricity going through it. So all the nerves, all the ends of the wires are frayed and fried, right? They're firing and firing and firing, because every single part of your brain is saying, do it, because I need to reinforce this wiring. And that's why Sinclair is so different, because it gently helps the body unravel the wiring without damaging and fraying it, keeping the bulb intact and just putting it back in the box.
Yeah.
And that's ultimately the problem. And that's why you can go a little while and you're like, well, I made it past the 7 to 10 day detox window. I shouldn't have a problem anymore. It's like, no, that's just the start.
Right. Gosh, I know even when I would do the 30-day alcohol-free challenges, I would think in my mind, I believed by doing that, I was like resetting my habits and my craving. I didn't even think about the craving for alcohol at that time, to be honest. But what I found was after those dry January or sober October, day 31, oh man, you better believe I was back at it again and I couldn't wait. I was counting down the days. And I think that's something that a lot of loved ones unintentionally, they just don't know. They don't understand what someone is going through when the brain is addicted, and how much that desire is really still controlling their life, even when they're not drinking. And it becomes like one little thing can set someone off to return to drinking again because the urge is so strong. So I think that's something that's really important for loved ones to understand. Like even when someone's, I always use the analogy of like, okay, today I could say, maybe Dr. Sinclair used this as well, but I'm not going to drink water anymore. Like I just decided I'm going to quit. And right now I'm fine because I just drank a bunch of water, but tomorrow or the next day, all I would be thinking about is getting that water. And I felt like that was so true with my alcohol. I could say I'm going to quit, not touch it today, but then a few days later, I was like, oh my gosh, I really need a drink. And it just wouldn't leave me until I had it. But yeah, TSM completely reversed that. It's just incredible.
Yeah, it's are you familiar with Prochaska's stages of change research?
Yes, I love that chart.
Highly.
Yes. That's as
Yeah.
much as I know is like the chart. I reference it at times, but
Yeah.
please, sorry, go on.
So this is true in all behavior change, right? So this is not unique to trying to stop alcohol use disorder or get off sugar. so change comes in a spiral. So it's not this, everybody thinks this like straight uphill trajectory. Okay, I'm going to go from here and then I'm not going to be doing it anymore.
Yeah.
And it goes as a spiral, and we go through kind of not recognizing there's a problem to recognizing there's a problem. And then there's sort of fact finding, right? So then we go find information. Maybe we go buy gym clothes, but we don't go to the gym, we buy the clothes. And that's where all the ads are designed. So if you fall into the ad thing, they're all designed for the person in that place, in this pre-contemplation. Then we get to contemplation, and then we actually get into action, right? And we get into action, and that's where we start doing the behavior. The problem is we tell everybody that a habit is built in 30 days, which is 100% wrong. 100% wrong. There's nothing in the research that even comes close to that. It got into your schedule if you consistently did it over a 30-day period. All that means is it got on your schedule. Habits become habits when you change your identity. So at the very top of that action chart, identify as the other thing, right? So I'll use food as an example. I identify as a healthy eater, somebody who doesn't do, let's say, fast food as a good example, right? So until I've identified myself, not I'm a recovering McDonald's addict, not I'm a, you know what I mean? Like I am now a healthy individual, right? I am now somebody who does not drink, right? Until that identity has solidified, your likelihood of spiraling down that spiral is almost guaranteed. Like smoking has an 11 time up and down the spiral habit, right? So we have to, that's why I think the mental desire of the person on TSM of, I want to get control of this. I no longer want to be, craving and beholden to the alcohol. They need to identify as, this isn't me anymore. I don't drink, right? I'm not a drinker, right?
Yeah. I think that's so important. And that's also something that it's something internal that has to switch. So it's not like an obvious change that happens on the outside. Like when you weigh yourself and you're 10 pounds less, like you can see the change, but with the identity, I think that's so important. It's coming to mind a coaching client I had where she was on naltrexone and had seen some progress, but was really struggling. And what came up on the call was her still identifying, I love my red wine ritual. I'm a red wine drinker. Like, I don't know who I would be without that bottle of red every night. These are things she said on the call. And it's like, that is exactly it. Like, she feels like naltrexone isn't working, and it's not going to work if somebody's beliefs and identity, just like you're saying, are fighting it. Like, they may see some progress, but that internal shift, that mindset shift, starting to practice things that will allow you to become that person over time. I think that's so crucial to success with anything, but yeah, with TSM, I'm so glad you brought that up.
Yeah, it is, because it's hard. We get, especially as I would say, particularly women. I don't know if people have talked about this on your show, but over the last really 20 years, but really the last 10 years, the entire marketing shift of the alcohol industry has shifted to target women. Wine advertising and winery spending is like eclipsed hard liquor 10 times over. Your White Claws, your little, whatever those fizzy drinks are. I've always thought they were disgusting, but but all of those things, those are geared to women. Yeah. The entire marketing sway is going to females, even beer, right? Even beer advertising is going towards women because we are the fastest growing group of drinkers, right? And we get addicted on average in half the time it takes men.
Wow. Really? I did not know that.
Yeah, because we metabolize alcohol differently. Our liver does, because of our hormones. We have more body fat, we have less muscle mass, and we don't metabolize nearly as quickly as men. And so the impact on us as addiction usually happens in less than 10 years. Men, it usually takes more than 10.
Wow, that is so in your work that you do as well, do you see women who are around the menopause age? Because I've just heard multiple times and seen some studies where it talks about the hormone changes that happen during that time can make people more prone to developing problem drinking. Is that true and what you've seen?
100%. Yeah, 100%. Because so there's over 37 symptoms of menopause. So 100% of women go through menopause. There's no pass. We all go through it. 87% will be symptomatic, and the average woman has symptoms for 8 years. And they start way earlier than you thought.
Great. I have that to look forward to then.
Yeah. Sorry to be a bummer. Like my symptoms started in my late 30s, and I was like, it can't be that yet. I'm only 38, 39 years old. What's going on? But often mood, anxiety, depression, cognitive function starts to get a little blunted. We don't sleep very well, so we're exhausted. So then we also have very short fuse. And so again, alcohol is a social lubricant. People use it to make themselves feel whatever they like. I don't want to feel that feeling anymore. I need to take the edge off, whatever that is. And so it's something that we use as a drug to change how we feel.
Mm-hmm.
But it is the most socially acceptable, if not lauded drug. Right. And so we've seen extraordinary growth in alcohol drinking and alcohol use disorder in women over 40. You know, the other thing too is we often by that point have more disposable incomes. Often the children in many cases aren't itty bitty. So we have a little more freedom, and, you know, and then we have the kind of Sex in the City sort of vibe going. And then, yeah. And then it just kind of goes from there. But it is troublesome, right?
Yeah.
It is troublesome.
Yeah. And then we feel super guilty for it, and we're trying to juggle everything. And that wine is just becomes like the BFF to kind of unwind after all of our day's tasks are done. And it's this slippery slope. Like, I have so many women who tell me, and I'm sure it's true for men as well, like, I don't know where one or two glasses at dinner turned into one or two bottles where I'm staying up after the kids are in bed. And yeah, just I have such a passion of like normalizing alcohol use disorder. Like you were talking about, we're all on that slope. Like it can happen to anyone just by drinking, which is something that's so socially acceptable, so normalized, so easy to fall into that trap, not really realizing how addictive it can be and how hard it is to kind of get out of it once you're in it.
Yeah. And I agree with you. I think we still to this day portray alcohol use disorder as a willpower problem.
Yeah.
People are lazy, not disciplined. We can throw all kinds of nasty adjectives at it when it's everything farther from the truth. Like that is so far away from the truth. And because of that, people suffer because they don't get the help they need, because they don't want people to know the social stigma, right? There's a social stigma if you do drink too much, and then there's a social stigma when you stop.
So true. Yeah. Yeah. Or like, oh, you have to label yourself an alcoholic and go to 30 meetings in 30 days. It's like most people don't feel comfortable doing that. And that's where I'm really passionate about, hey, like, even if you're a gray area drinker and it's not that bad yet, naltrexone is a powerful tool. I wanted to go back a minute to kind of your spousal perspective of supporting John. Like, this is kind of a broad question, but how did you support him? Like when he was starting on the method and understanding he was someone who was more of a slow responder, as we like to say. Of course, you had a different perspective because you have all this knowledge and understanding, with the profession you're in. But for those listening that maybe are just wondering, like, how do I even support my spouse? What do I do? How do I check in with them without being naggy? What results should I expect? I just wondered if you wanted to speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I am lucky because, I was like, okay, you're a slow responder. So I start looking up how long does it take to metabolize? And I'm a nerd. So, but outside of that, I think even without the science knowledge, I think the challenge is, and I'm going to come at it from my natural tendency. My natural tendency is I obviously ask a lot of questions, right? And there's a thin line between asking questions and interrogating, right? And then there's a thin line between asking questions, interrogating, and then doing the best thing ever, which is trying to understand where somebody's coming from, which is really a different way of having a conversation and asking questions. So me, I had to get out of that questioning, sort of like I'm trying to fact find and figure out. A lot of it was I was trying to fact find and figure out what do I need to help, right? Because you want to go in there and kind of buffer this discomfort because we all want to do that. And that wasn't really productive, right? That was, if anything, that would probably make him push me away more. And so more of it was trying to ask questions about how things feel, And with men, I'm just going to say this, a lot of times when you ask a feeling word, they're like, I don't know, right? Because we don't teach little boys how to feel, right? We teach them how to think, right? So what do you think about that? And a lot of it was just, I'm not trying to change you. I love you, and I'm going to be here with you, and I'm going to support you, but I'm not going to nag you and try and change you. But I want to understand what it's like. I think it's always kind of going, okay, what is it like? Because we think we know because we're watching from the outside and we have no idea of what it really is like. And I think sometimes getting counseling, like marriage counseling and working with professionals, you need to rent a stranger often in the room that is dedicated to helping you talk about things that are uncomfortable to talk about. Because oddly enough, the more couples are together, the longer, often the more they get nervous about showing their underbelly. It's really, really strange. You would think it'd be the opposite. You think, oh, we've known each other 25 years. I know everything about you. But there's kind of this U-shaped curve of getting to know somebody a lot. And then as people get older, their bodies change, their hormones change, life changes. You become more insecure to some degree. So your relationships that you spent probably 20 years raising your kids and all that other stuff, right? Now if you take that off the table, like we're not here to manage your kids, we're here to understand each other. We don't know anymore because we spent a decade or two watching our kids. So people actually get more insecure, right? So wherever you are on that continuum, you want to help with security by being curious again, like you just met. Like you just met and like you're just trying to understand each other, because it's understanding that you need. It's not, what do I need to do?
Yeah.
Right. I need to understand, and I need to understand what you need and how I can be there, but I don't need to tell you.
Yeah.
You know, and it's hard because I do this all day. I ask questions all day and then I extrapolate information, and to come home, I'm like, don't put on the work hat. Don't, I don't, he doesn't need me to work on him. So I was like, always like, stop it, you know?
So what kind, do you have an example of like a question or two that you would ask, like, after he drank or if he had a bad night, just so people have a frame of reference of like maybe how to phrase the question so it doesn't feel like it's interrogating someone?
I think one of the ones that I like to have around is like, what does it feel like?
Yeah.
What does it feel like? Like, I remember a very distinct conversation we had about the craving, right? Like I said, it's a slippery slope. You come home and I'd be like, okay, he's already drinking, so I'm gonna have a glass of wine. And then you're like, okay, I'm doing that every night. Now that's not good, right?
Mhm.
And then you're like, okay, I'm going out with my friends, and you get to the restaurant and you're like, why is the waiter late?
Yeah.
Like I would have a little moment like, why did it take him 20 minutes to get to the table? But in his mind, so I asked him one day, I said, what does it feel like? He's like, oh, I'm already talking in my head. We got to go to this restaurant. How busy are they? How fast are they going to get to the bar? Do I have a waiter that already knows me because he's going to get the drink and bring it to me because he saw me walk in? You know what I mean? Like it's that there's this sort of interplay going on, this inner dialogue of discomfort around the receiving and getting of it, right?
Yeah.
Like that was something I was really curious about, because I couldn't relate to the same level of craving, because that's a craving, that's not a desire, that's a
Yeah.
craving. And that, like, for us, that was a really good way to open the conversation, because it wasn't pointing out any kind of trouble. I was just trying to understand. I was like, help me understand what it feels like, because I don't have that same sensation, or at least not to the same degree,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And I think it's coming from that. Like, what does it feel like? How does that feel the next day? What do you?
Yeah. Yeah, that's really, really helpful. That's something my husband would do as well. Just like when you drink on the naltrexone, like how does it help you drink less? Or what do you notice? What's different? And I felt like it was these open-ended questions as opposed to like, why did you drink a bottle of wine last night, even though you took naltrexone, like which felt very like judgy. And not everyone has that skill set. And even if they mean well, it's like the questions can come off in a weird way. So I love that you said just being curious and coming from a place of wanting to understand, not try to like diagnose and fix. Because just by understanding, I think it can influence the behavior and the conversations that you as the spouse are having with them, right?
Yeah. Well, the reality is, so maybe my thing isn't alcohol use disorder, but I got something. We
Yeah.
all do. So remember that thumb points back at you. Like or what is it? The hands, the fingers, as you point your finger, the rest of the fingers are pointing back at you. You have your own stuff too, right? It may not be as obvious, or it may not be as disruptive at the moment in the relationship, but we all have something. And if we look at our relationships with others as, the greatest form of love is to try and understand and walk in somebody else's shoes,
Yeah.
because then we can actually embrace them and love them. If we keep coming at it with that kind of thought process, I think it helps us open that dialogue. Because often I think for my husband, he would say, I don't know.
Mm.
He's like, I don't know. It's just chaos in there. We're like, I don't know
Yeah.
what I'm thinking. And I'm like, okay, it's cool. When you do,
Yeah.
let me know. And I think the other thing that was good for me and my husband is somebody that if you ask a question, he needs to like think about it, ponder it. He's not, it's if I keep pressing and I want that answer now,
Yeah.
he wants to make sure it's right. Right.
Yeah.
So I would leave it. We would have a conversation. And if the questions and conversations sort of stopped, I would leave it. And he'd come back a day later and go, okay. So, because he had to like get it clear in his head, or, and understanding that that's the way he is, that helped me not keep poking. I'm not going to poke the bear. It's not going to help.
Yeah. No, it's probably going to make things worse.
Yeah.
That's really helpful. So I keep wondering, like, because he was a slow responder, something else I often hear from loved ones is that it's not working fast enough. Like, we have a gal in our program. I've been with her from day one. She's been on it for a year. Her drinking is down like 75%, but she's still not where she wants to be. But she's like so committed, so engaged. But her family's like, hello, like you were supposed to be where you're, not drinking anymore at a year, or hardly drinking, because I think her goal is to drink socially on special events or something. So as a spouse, like, how did you manage that feeling of just naturally wanting to be impatient or wanting this problem gone? Or did you struggle with that? Were you patient alongside him? How was that?
Okay. I'm probably one of the most patient people you ever run into. I really am, oddly enough, I am and I'm not, which is kind of funny. I'm very patient with people. I'm not patient with what I want out of life, like, so I'm highly driven, but I'm also very patient. So, for me, I looked at it and I think I understood and resonated with the fact that I think my husband had to, because my husband wanted to get control of it. Oh, I can go have a drink or two and that's it. And I think and I think he probably even said this on your interview, I think a lot of it was that he was going for that, right? And there was probably a lot of months where that was the goal, and he had to get clear with himself that that probably wasn't going to be what's right for him, right? He had to go through probably wasn't to isn't. Like, he identifies as a non-drinker, right? And I think we all have to kind of go through that, and I think that's where that identity piece comes in. I don't think everybody that does TSM has to stop drinking 100%, because a lot of people use it kind of medicinally like that. But I think there are some people that, maybe that's where they need to go. For him, that was what was required. Because I think up until he got that in, like, solidified in his identity that I'm not going to drink anymore, that this was untenable. I don't want this anymore. That it was always going to be a longer struggle. So I think understanding it's their journey, and you just got to let them ride their journey, right? And also applaud the fact that, hey, 75% down on the alcohol consumption, right? So there's plenty of places to find evidence for that in your life. When somebody has gone from 100% down to 25% drinking, that's hugely applaudable, right? Right. So it's also recognizing the huge hill that person's already climbed.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's really well said. It's we're always focusing on like celebrating the small wins in our program, because that's typically I think success a lot of people see. It's not like, oh, 3 weeks and I'm, not drinking anymore. It's usually like these gradual changes that happen over time with someone on TSM.
Yeah.
What other tips would you have for loved ones who are trying to support someone on the method? Anything else you would like to share, just based on your experience, maybe things that were particularly challenging or that you found rewarding, or just anything at all you have to share?
Yeah. I mean, I think, kind of going back to that conversation about, understanding that everybody's on that journey. I tell people, I'm like, if I were to take your phone away from you right now and I'd lock it up for a month, how would you feel? No social media, right? Because we're all addicted to that sucker, right? And so, some people have 7 hours a day, some people have 30 minutes, right? So it's like recognizing that. So what I would say in supporting somebody that's going through this, the other thing I did is I tried Naltrexone. I was like, I want to know. I was like, I'm going to try it, and so I took it, I was like, okay, we're going to go out to dinner. I'm going to have some wine with you, or whatever it was. And I was like, I'm going to take it. And I'd be like, okay, and for me, I didn't notice, this might be true for people that have done this. I didn't notice a big difference, but I also didn't drink significantly to excess either. Right. And, or not, and so, I did some with it because I wanted to experience it. I wanted to understand it. I wanted to know what it felt like to do it. And I think it's also just really important that you're going to get frustrated, right? Like any there's stuff comes up in relationship. We get frustrated with each other all the time. It doesn't have to even be about this. And I think it's really important to remember when you are frustrated with the partner there or whoever you've got in your life that might be going through this, is understanding it is biochemical, right? It is a biochemical change that your brain must go through. And it takes months, if not years, for that brain to rewire itself. And so you got to give people a little bit of slack and understand, even though there's probably bad things that may have happened, right? Disruption to the family, all kinds of stuff, that the person standing in front of you right now that is working on TSM and working on trying to get sober and not have that experience is not the same person, right, that may have had all the disruption in your life. They're the same person that you probably met, and they're the same person they were as a child, but there was alcohol influencing every part of their experience, right? Yeah. And that they don't necessarily need to be held to the fire for what happened 20 years ago. Let it go. Like, just let it go. Whatever 5 years ago, 2 years ago, 6 months ago, let it go, right? Because if you harbor that anger, it's always going to come out, and you're not going to be the supportive person that can probably help that person just make it through the rest of the challenge.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. It's a healing journey for both people, honestly, especially if there's been a lot of damage done with the drinking. But my view is, if someone's willing to take naltrexone and they're engaged in this protocol, to me, that's a clear indicator that they want this change. If they didn't want the change, they wouldn't take the medicine. Like, I've seen plenty of people who just weren't ready, like you were talking about the cycles of change or whatever it's called, and just they're in that pre-contemplation state, or contemplation. They're not ready to make the change yet. So I think if someone's taking it, and they're doing the protocol, but even if it's taking a little bit longer, like maybe that's an indication to plug into some support, like you said, get therapy, plug into a program or something, just to take it to the next level, because there's so many things that cause people to drink to excess, whether it's habits or coping or things like that. And naltrexone is a really powerful tool that gives us the ability to kind of undo all of that and heal the brain. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It really, really is. And so, I can only just agree with you.
Yeah. Gosh, this has been such a good conversation, Betty. Are there other things you wanted to touch on or talk about before we wrap up?
Let me think. What I would say, so if there's somebody listening that maybe is, doing TSM, right? Like, let's say they're doing it and they feel like it's not working, or they feel very, very stuck. I would say probably the most important thing is recognizing, number one, very much that there's a biochemical aspect of it. Yeah. And then there's the emotional, social, mental, spiritual, all that other side. And like you said, I think until somebody sort of steps into both of those arenas and kind of steps on each side of that fence, it was really hard. Like, I'm a scientist, right? I'm a scientist. I'm one of the most logical people you'll run into when it comes to that. I'm always like, well, let me problem solve that. Why is that doing that? That's not logical. But you can't logic away this. You can't, right? And that means, as a spouse or a partner from somebody, you can't logic away the problem, right? You have to stand on both sides of that fence. And so if you're only standing on one side and you're doing the logical thing of using Sinclair Method, and you just get the support for the other side, even if it's super uncomfortable, because that's like the last part of the onion you got to peel back to get to the inside.
Yeah, that's so well said. That was something I was personally humbled with a few months in. I was like, great, this pill's going to help me drink less. And then 3 to 4 months into the method, I was drinking less, but all this stuff was starting to surface. And I was like, okay, I've got to take this more seriously. And I started seeing a therapist to kind of process some of these reasons that I wasn't even aware of that were driving me to drink, and memories and things. So it is kind of humbling, I think, to ask for help, but it's I think that most of us would really benefit from it, and even see faster or better progress on the method. So I just encourage people to take your advice and do that. You're worth the extra support. Like, naltrexone is powerful, but there's more to it than just taking a pill, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Gosh, thank you so much for this conversation. We covered so many different topics, and it was like, I just learned so much from you. I love how you describe TSM. I'm encouraged that you're using this in your practice. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about what you do or listen to your podcast?
Probably the easiest way is to go to bettymurray.com, and it's BETTYMURRAY. Or if you want to look at my clinic is livingwelldallas.com, but you can get to either spot from either location.
Okay, perfect. And I'll include those links below in the description and show notes. Thank you so much, Betty. This was an awesome conversation. I appreciate you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.